So that concludes our AGM, and we'll move right along then to our wonderful guest speaker. Before we do that, I certainly, on behalf of the board and myself, I'd like to extend a welcome to all of you who are listening tonight. We certainly I hope you will enjoy Beth. We would like you this time also to give us some feedback after the event, after the speaker, not necessarily on the line, but please give us, send us an email. Let us know if this is the type of guest speaker you're interested in. Certainly by a lot of our correspondence, there has been an interest tonight in nutrition and general health. So we could certainly keep arranging additional guest speakers in that vein or other suggested topics. We certainly try to provide those types of informational speakers for you. It appears on our website afterwards so that those that are not able to join us tonight are able to access that. Jim, is there anything? I will introduce Beth if there's nothing else that you want to add. Is there anything in terms of...
Yeah, there is.
Okay.
I just want to remind people that this part of the meeting now starting is going to be recorded and eventually mounted on our website, hopefully in the next couple of days. So if, I'd encourage you not to give personal information about who you are. If you want to just use your first name or call yourself Yogi Bear or whatever, that's fine. Because it is going to be generally available on the internet. But that's all.
Thank you, Jim.
Take it away, Mimi.
Okay. Well, Beth Haliburton is with us tonight, and she's one of our new board members, and we are certainly thrilled to have her. Beth had agreed to give this presentation tonight. She is definitely a professional in her field. She has a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Dalhousie University and a Bachelor of Applied Science in Nutrition from Ryerson University. She's completed her practical internship at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto. After completing her training, she worked at Sick Kids in the Department of Hepatology and Nutrition, and is now working in the Department of General Surgery. Welcome, Beth. Beth will give a presentation, and then we'll open it up to anyone for questions and answers. Thank you so much, Beth. Take it away.
Thank you, Mimi. Before I start, I have my phone on speaker. Is it too echoey, or is it okay?
No, you seem to be okay.
Okay, perfect. So I just wanted to touch a little bit on some healthy eating tips and at the beginning of the presentation, and then move into some more sort of Alpha-1 specific stuff later on, and hopefully we have time to cover everything and leave time for some questions. So to start off, healthy eating is basically your best defense against all diseases. Talking about preventable diseases like heart disease and diabetes, as well as to help somebody manage a chronic disease and be the healthiest that you possibly can be with that chronic disease. And so the important part of that is to maintain a healthy body weight. We know that extra weight strains all body systems, and if somebody is lung affected, then it especially strains the lungs. And so by maintaining a healthy body weight, you're minimizing that from making the lung condition worse. So to achieve a healthy body weight, it's really just a matter of energy balance. So basically the energy in, or your calories or energy that you eat from food, must equal the energy that you put out, so the physical activity that you do. And that's to achieve weight maintenance. Now, if you want to achieve weight loss, then obviously the energy out has to be more than the energy that you eat. So the energy that you get in, I just wanted to touch a little bit on some pointers I have for that. It is a little bit of an ongoing struggle for a lot of people. And one of the tools that's been developed is the Canadian Food Guide. Now, the food guide is designed to translate the current nutritional research that's being done and translate it into practical information that the average person can use. And so theoretically, it's a helpful tool to be able to tell you how much of different types of foods that somebody should eat. It's gone through a number of evolutions, I guess, over the years. And in 2007, it was recently launched again with a slightly more modern look, adjusted food groups, and slight changes to the serving sizes, and includes a few extra healthy tips. It can actually be customized if you go onto their website to your age and your gender, so you don't have to have all of the information for people who, for young kids or for senior people. You can actually pick specifically things that would apply only to you. So you can actually go on to the Health Canada website and customize something and print it off for you. So then the energy out portion is basically the calories that you burn. So there's two terms that I wanted to talk about in this for this. The first term is the idea of a healthy lifestyle, and the second term is physical activity. And so those two things do differ, even though they sound really similar. Healthy lifestyle refers specifically to ways that you can take your day-to-day life and become more active. They're just simple changes. They're, walking up the stairs instead of taking the elevator or the escalator, or, maybe even taking one flight of stairs and then taking the elevator the rest of the way if it's too far to go all the way up. So it's just making small little tweaks to the things that you do in your day-to-day living that makes you have a little bit more activity in your life. The other term, the physical activity, refers to a little bit more of an intense activity level. So your heart rate is actually getting up, is increasing for 15 or 20 minutes or even longer. And that's so this type of physical activity is really what burns the calories and really what creates a physically fit person. And the recommendations for physical activity are 30 to 60 minutes of exercise at least 3 times a week. So combining the two, having the active lifestyle and making a few changes in your day-to-day living, as well as having more physical activity where you actually get your heart rate up and start breathing harder, those two things together help to make sure that the energy out portion of that energy balance is maximized. So another term that you may have come across is that we use in the nutrition and healthy lifestyle world is the term BMI. So what this is a measure that we use to determine whether somebody has a healthy body weight. And what it does, it's a mathematical equation that is basically a ratio of your weight to your height. So I'll describe the calculation to you, but also give you a website that you can go on and calculate it out yourself so you don't have to, do some kilo and pound conversions. So the equation itself is your weight in kilograms divided by your height in meters, and then the height needs to be squared, so multiply your height by itself. And the website that you can go to calculate that out is www.eatracker.ca, and that's EATRACKER.ca, so Eat Tracker but with one T. And so what we can do with that information is determine whether somebody is at normal body weight, if they're overweight, if they're underweight, or even, very much overweight. And the goal for your BMI is between 18.5 to 24.9. So if your BMI calculates to be between those two numbers, then you're at a normal healthy weight. If you're above that, then clearly you're going to be overweight, and below that you're underweight. So that sort of gives healthcare professionals and individuals a number that actually tells us whether you're at a healthy body weight or not. So that can be quite helpful if you're not really sure about your own body. So the next thing I wanted to talk about were some specific nutrients. The first is choosing the right fat. So this is often a big question that people ask. What's the story with saturated fats? What's the story with unsaturated fats and cholesterol? And, how do I decide what to do? Or how do I know what to do? So saturated fats are also known as the bad fats. And that type of fat is what increases your blood cholesterol. It's the fat that increases your risk of any sort of heart disease or hypertension and all those types of diseases that we hear so much about these days. And those types of fats come from animal sources. And as a general rule, those types of fats are solid at room temperature. So butter, for example. That is made from milk fat, which comes from an animal, and when it's at room temperature, it's solid. And the same sort of applies if you think about the fat on your steak or, any other sort of meat product. So think saturated fat, think solid at room temperature, and that means that it's not very good for you. Unsaturated fats, on the other hand, come from plants, and it contains absolutely no cholesterol. And these types of fats are actually liquid at room temperature, which basically means they're oils. Now, there is a slight exception to this rule, and that's margarine. Margarine is typically solid at room temperature and comes from plants, but it's chemically changed so that it stays spreadable. Unsaturated fats are much healthier fats, and they are much better for people who have high cholesterol. Now, that being said, just because they're considered the good fats doesn't mean that you can consume as much as you want. They are still fats. They're still a source of lots of calories. So if you eat too much unsaturated fat, it's not good for you either because it can lead to lots of weight gain. So the important thing is to choose lower fat food options and aiming towards using more saturated fats using more unsaturated fats than you do saturated fats. The next nutrient that I thought I would mention is another one that we hear a lot about in the media these days, and that's vitamin D. It's considered to be the sunshine vitamin. It is actually made on the skin when the skin is exposed to sunshine and the UV lights, the UV rays in sun. But the problem is in Canada, especially in the winter, we are much too covered up to have enough skin exposure in order to make vitamin D. And also the angle of our sun prevents enough intensity of the sun rays in order to create vitamin D. So in the winter, vitamin D is not considered a sunshine vitamin for us, and instead needs to come from food or supplements. The most interesting thing with vitamin D recently is in some big studies where they've looked at the blood work of a lot of Canadians. They've actually found that the average Canadian is deficient in vitamin D, and that's even worse in the winter. But surprisingly, lots of people in the summer were also deficient. So sort of the bottom line and kind of the public health message here is that really all Canadians should be taking a supplement of vitamin D. And if people have specific questions about how much, then we can talk about that at the end, and it can maybe be going into what I post on the website. The thing about vitamin D in terms of why your body needs it is that we do know that it's essential for maximizing bone health, and having really strong bones is really important for people. There's other research going on vitamin D for its anti-inflammatory properties. which means that any sort of inflammation that's going on in your body, vitamin D may be helpful in reducing that inflammation. There's a lot that we still don't know about vitamin D's role in this at the moment, so I wouldn't recommend people go home and take massive doses of vitamin D specifically for their anti-inflammatory properties, but down the road, you know, there may be some more interesting research that comes out on this. But I thought I would mention it just because, you know, it's really discussed a lot on the radio and in the media these days. Since I'm talking about vitamin D, which is considered a fat-soluble vitamin, which means that it doesn't dissolve in water, it only dissolves in fat, I just wanted to quickly mention the other 3 fat-soluble vitamins because these are particularly affected in people who have the liver disease portion of alpha-1. And so that would be vitamin A, vitamin E, and vitamin K. So the fat-soluble vitamins need the liver for normal absorption. And so when your liver is affected and if it becomes, you know, quite cirrhotic and there's not a whole lot of bile flow through the liver, then your absorption of these vitamins may be reduced. And if this does affect you, it's important for your healthcare team to monitor your fat-soluble vitamin levels in your blood and supplement accordingly. You know, I can give more information about that at the end of the presentation, but it's very individual, and it will depend entirely on what your blood work indicates, so that might be something to discuss with your doctor. So the next nutrient would be iron. So iron's kind of been, you know, there's nothing new and exciting and hot about iron these days that we hear about. It's not, you know, a new and exciting thing, but at the same time, it's really, really important. It's essential for normal oxygen transportation in the blood. Iron is actually the chemical that's the center of a specific component of your blood that's called hemoglobin. And hemoglobin's job is to transport oxygen around. So basically, in order to have sufficient oxygen going around, you need to have enough hemoglobin, which needs enough iron. So it's kind of one of those sequential things that if you don't have the first step, you're not going to have enough oxygen moving around in your body. So in somebody who has, you know, reduced lung capacity and breathing is quite hindered, if you have decreased levels of iron, then you're going to have even less oxygen being transported around your body. So the important thing is to have your iron levels checked frequently with your doctor to make sure that you have enough iron to maximize what oxygen is being transported around, because the last thing you want to do is add another factor into, you know, reduced oxygen. So iron is very common in food. Mostly meat products are most efficient at providing your body with iron, but at the same time there are vegetable products that do contain iron as well, and there would be your green leafy vegetables like spinach and kale. But the tricky thing with the iron in the vegetables is it's not as easily used by the body. It is used, but you have to consume a lot more of the green leafy vegetables in order to have the same effect as the iron from meat products. But if you do have low levels, if your doctor does tell you that your hemoglobin or your iron is low, I would suggest a supplement to normalize it, and then also trying to make sure that you have a regular intake of iron-containing foods in your day-to-day life. And there's lots of information on the internet on how to do that. Okay, so the next nutrient I wanted to address was sodium. So sodium is also one of those nutrients that kind of you hear about every once in a while when an interesting study comes out, but it's not hot, it's not sexy right now. It is an essential nutrient for your body, so I don't want to say outright that sodium is bad. It is normal for you do need it for your normal bodily functions. It helps to maintain the fluid balance in your body. It helps to transmit nerve impulses, and it helps with the contraction and relaxation of muscles. So usually what happens is your kidneys filter sodium from your blood, and then you just pee it out. However, sometimes the kidneys can't filter enough sodium from your blood. Either you have too much in your diet, or your kidneys aren't quite functioning the way they were, and so as a result, sodium starts to accumulate in your blood. But what happens is your body works really hard in order to maintain the sodium level in your blood. So if your kidneys can't filter it out so that you just pee it out, what happens instead is your body starts to accumulate more regular water in order to make sure that the sodium concentration remains the same. And so what happens when you start to store more water is your blood pressure will go up, and that's what we call water retention, or it's also known as, if you have significant pools of fluid, it can be called edema, so that type of thing. So the important thing in terms of sodium is if this is happening to you and your blood pressure is climbing, by reducing your salt intake means that your body will retain less water, and hopefully you'll be able to keep a much closer or tighter fluid balance. So in terms of how much sodium do you need, the recommendations right now are 2,300 milligrams, which is the equivalent of 1 teaspoon of salt per day, which is not a whole lot. If you think about a teaspoon, which is a 5 ml measure, it's a teeny tiny amount compared to what the average Canadian actually does eat. So the best way to decrease your sodium intake is to reduce or eat less processed foods, because processed foods are packed full of sodium. And processed foods, I'm also including restaurant food, takeout food, delivery food, all of those types of things that even if you think you're going out for a really nice meal and it seems home cooked, it's likely full of salt, because that's what it takes or that's what chefs tend to use to give a lot of flavor. So that's sort of the number one way to reduce your sodium intake. Also, the second way is to use less sodium in your own cooking. So, for example, don't throw some salt in the pasta water or in with the potatoes. Just cook it in straight water, because then the potatoes or the rice or the pasta isn't absorbing the sodium into them, which you're then eating later on. And then the third point is to use less salt at the dinner table. You sprinkle a little bit of salt into the palm of your hand and then pour it on your food, as opposed to just shaking the salt shaker right over your food. By putting it into your hand, you can control the amount of salt that you're actually putting on, and you can actually see how much you're putting on, because you may be surprised. A few shakes of the salt shaker may be equivalent of a half a teaspoon already right there. So by putting it into your hand, you can try and reduce that amount. So those are sort of the three pointers in terms of sodium, reducing your sodium intake. So the next part of the presentation, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the other they're nutrients, but they're specifically sold as, or people talk about them as sort of immune-supporting nutrients, because that's a really hot topic these days. And the first one here is antioxidants. And so antioxidants you hear a lot about. Red wine has antioxidants, green tea, multicolored or bright-colored fruits and vegetables have lots of antioxidants. But do you actually really know what they are? I have to admit, it's always something that I have to look at myself. I sort of know concept-wise what they do, but in order to give a good explanation, I do have to remind myself. So I figured it was probably something that you guys would like to have another explanation on as well. So basically what antioxidants are is, I kind of think of them as being the sacrificial lamb. So in your body, there's a chemical reaction that's called oxidation, and it's a bunch of reactions that all kind of happen together that cause pretty serious cell damage and cell death. And what happens is, if you don't have a lot of antioxidants in your system, is the oxidation process occurs on your own cells, which means that you've got, lots of cells dying. Your body needs to be able to regenerate those cells. So if somebody has antioxidants in their system, those antioxidants are actually sacrificed first. So they're the sacrificial lamb. So the oxidation process goes after the antioxidants and uses all of the antioxidants up before it gets to your body cells. So these can be beneficial because they can, reduce the risk of all sorts of things, including cancer, and there's an anti-inflammatory property, and so they can be helpful to, maximizing your health. Now, there are many types of antioxidants, and not all affect the same part of the body or the same sort of disease condition. Vitamin C is considered an antioxidant, so is vitamin E, but they do have different functions in the body. So the main message that I want to give here in terms of antioxidants is it's best to eat a variety of foods and get the antioxidants from their natural source, because basically by eating a healthy diet with lots of fruits and vegetables in it, you're going to be maximizing your antioxidant intake. Colorful fruits and vegetables in particular are fully stocked with antioxidants. Tomatoes have an antioxidant called lycopene, as do strawberries and raspberries. So brightly colored fruits and vegetables are especially high in antioxidants. I don't generally recommend supplements for these, basically because there's limited research on the individual supplements. One study that looks specifically at the antioxidants in tomatoes, called lycopene, will say that it has really good outcomes. Other studies looking at the exact same antioxidant will find that there was no benefit at all from the supplement itself. And the reason why we think this may happen, research is not really very good at deciding if the supplements are helpful or not, is that we think that the antioxidant in the food has more of an additive effect with all of the other nutrients in the food than if you were to take the supplement alone. So something happens in the food that we don't quite understand that makes the antioxidant work better than if you were to take it as a single supplement. You can, it is possible to buy supplements, but I don't typically recommend them because we don't know how helpful they are. I'd much rather you go home and eat a nice meal with lots of colorful food in it in order to get your antioxidants. So the next nutrient in terms of immune function or immune support are omega-3 fats. So you probably hear a lot about omega-3 fats, more so in terms of heart disease. There's been a lot of research in omega-3 fats in terms of heart disease. But there's been some other research more recently, and sometimes we can take the research in a certain condition like heart disease and think about the concepts and apply it to another disease, like, for example, alpha-1. So I'm going to start to just describe this concept a little bit and what the properties are of the omega-3s that help us, that we think may be applicable to other conditions. So omega-3 is actually a type of fat that is necessary for human health. It's considered an essential fat, but the body can't actually make it. It must come from the food that we eat. It has what we call anti-inflammatory properties, which I mentioned before. And so the research that's been done on heart disease is really looking at diets high in omega-3 fats and how it reduces the inflammation in in the cardiovascular system in order to reduce somebody's risk of heart disease or reduce their reoccurrence of having another heart-related event. And so because there's such strong evidence in the anti-inflammatory properties related to heart disease, we think there may be some sort of anti-inflammatory property that can be translated to other conditions. There's not been any specific research on using omega-3 fats in alpha-1, but we do know that when somebody does have alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, then there is reduced control. There's reduced control of inflammation. So in a general healthy, for somebody who has normal alpha-1 antitrypsin levels, it's the protein, the antitrypsin protein, is a regulator of inflammation. So it actually causes inflammation to be reduced. So in somebody who is deficient in alpha-1 antitrypsin, there's less control of inflammation. So any foods or any treatments that help to control inflammation have potential of being quite helpful in alpha-1. And so we sort of can use the research that's been done on omega-3s in other conditions and say, yeah, there's probably going to be some beneficial effect for people with alpha-1 as well. So in terms of what do you how do I get more omega-3s? Again, I like to suggest people eat foods that are rich in omega-3s instead of taking supplements. And omega-3 fats are found in foods like fish, salmon, and tuna, other seafoods, as well as canola oil. If you use canola oil on a regular basis, then you're probably getting a good source of omega-3 in your diet. If not canola oil, you can go for your nuts. Almonds and walnuts have a good source of omega-3. So there's lots of different ways that you can get omega-3 fats into your diet. All right, so the next nutrient I wanted to discuss is probiotics. So probiotics, you probably see all the commercials for the various yogurt products that are coming out with probiotics in them, with the dancing abdomens and the happy people because their GI tracts are working really well for the probiotics in the yogurts. So what is a probiotic? Basically, it's a bacteria. So everybody has bacteria in their GI tract. Sometimes what happens is the bacteria that's naturally down there kind of gets, out of sorts. And so a probiotic is a type of bacteria that you can eat which has a beneficial effect of the other bacteria that are in your gut. So either the probiotics that you eat replace the bacteria that are in your gut, or they help to work together in order to rebalance the bacteria that are down there. They are not harmful to your system, but they have a very beneficial effect of promoting healthy gut function. So helping food and stool to move through, helping to maximize nutrient absorption, making somebody just generally more comfortable in that region. There's no specific research on probiotics in alpha-1, but I think in terms of overall health, they're definitely starting to have a good role. The really tricky thing with probiotics is that there are probably millions of different types of bacteria that people are studying. And so not all bacteria have the same effect on different medical conditions. So that makes research really difficult. You have to pick your medical condition and you have to pick your probiotic bacteria strain. And if you do your study and you have no effect, you start to wonder, well, is it probiotics in general that weren't working, or was it that particular bacteria that you chose that doesn't work? So it's really difficult to give for researchers to decide which probiotic works best. It kind of depends on which medical condition that you have. So the most interesting thing that I've been able to find recently on probiotics was a study that looked at patients who were developing pneumonia, but they were patients who lived in the ICU and who were on ventilators. So there's a very specific type of pneumonia that these patients get. But they found that if the patients were given a bacteria called L. reminosus, the rate of their pneumonia, or the recurrence of pneumonia, decreased significantly. Now, this research was done in a very specific population using a very specific bacteria, but it's a really interesting idea that the probiotics in this case were being used to fight a bug or an infection that affects the lung, as opposed to just using the bacteria to help with gut function. So I can't say from this research whether eating yogurt with the bacteria, specifically this L. reminosus, could help somebody with regular pneumonia or somebody whose lung is vulnerable to pneumonia. I can't say that this type of bacteria can be helpful for sure, but it's definitely an interesting idea in that, you know, there may be some future research that eating a probiotic can be helpful for overall to help fight bad bugs, bad infections. So basically, there's a lot of information we don't know yet, but we know that they're not harmful. So, you know, definitely go ahead and try your yogurts with your probiotics. There's lots of other foods out there that have probiotics in them these days. So give them a try and see how you feel. If things improve, great. If they don't, that's fine. You gave it a shot. Sometimes supplements can be helpful, but again, it totally depends on which bug you're taking, which cocktail of bugs. Sometimes you can buy supplements with 3 or 4 different bacteria in it. You know, try it, see if it works. Talk to the people selling the probiotics to find out what sort of the companies market them to towards which disease conditions or symptoms, because often the research that does go on is happening at with the companies. The most important thing to remember when choosing a supplement, a probiotic supplement, is I recommend that you buy them from the refrigerated section because there's a better chance that the bacteria in the supplement is actually alive. Because if the bacteria is dead, it's a waste of your time, because it's not going to suddenly come back to life when it gets to your GI tract. It does have to be alive when it goes in. So that's why the refrigerated section is usually better than buying a pill or something that's just on the regular shelves. Okay, so for the next bit, Mimi, how much time do I have?
Well, we're almost at 8 o'clock, okay. So we'd certainly like to leave some time, but you're doing so well, Beth. I guess it's up to our group as whether we want to keep going. Can I have a general concession? How's everybody feeling?
Everybody's muted.
Yeah, everybody's muted, yeah.
I'm enjoying it. I think it's great. I've learned a lot.
Okay, so we keep going?
Sure.
All righty.
We don't have a whole lot more.
Okay.
I wanted to talk specifically about nutritional strategies in terms of lung complications versus liver complications. Some of it I've addressed a little bit throughout with specific nutrients, but there's a few other things I just wanted to mention. So in terms of lung complications of alpha-1, you know, I've mentioned iron in terms of oxygen transport. I've mentioned healthy body weight, all that kind of stuff. But there's a few other things that I wanted to mention. So in somebody who's actually having a lung flare, I guess for lack of a better word, whose rate of breathing is increased, breathing can actually be considered a type of exercise. It actually requires you burn calories when you're breathing really quickly. So somebody who's just sitting at rest but is still breathing quite hard is actually burning a lot more calories than somebody who's not breathing very hard. So it's important in a lung flare that you maximize the calories that you get from food, because what we don't want to happen is somebody who's breathing really heavy to lose significant amounts of weight, because as much as we know that weight gain is bad for your health, we know that really a rapid and significant weight loss in a short period of time can be bad for your health as well, especially if you're at a normal body weight to begin with. Losing weight also can strain all of your bodily systems. So it's important that when you are having increased work of breathing, that all of the foods that you do eat are as energy dense or have as much nutrition packed into each bite as possible. Now, somebody who is breathing really hard may find it difficult to eat, and so that's why I don't expect somebody in this type of situation to eat larger volumes of food, because that's difficult. But what I do recommend to people is that they add extra nutrition to whatever food that they do eat, whether it's, taking your slice of toast and putting butter on it before you put the peanut butter and the jam, somehow adding extra calories in order to maximize the food that you do eat to help minimize what weight loss you do experience. Now, the other aspect of that is in a lung flare, or even just in general if you have reduced lung capacity or lung function, avoiding overeating or avoiding foods that cause extra gas or bloating, because we do know that overeating basically means that your stomach is ram-packed full, and that will cause increased pressure sort of back up your esophagus, and that may affect your comfort, and the pressure of the enlarged stomach may be pressing a little bit on your diaphragm, which will then, affect your lung capacity. So overeating is definitely not something I recommend. And then foods that cause gas or bloating, trying to minimize those as well. And, foods that cause gas or bloating would be things as simple as carbonated beverages, or, if you eat a large meal, that's also going to cause some gas and bloating. If you eat really quickly or eat and talk at the same time, all of those things can cause increased gas. Now, there are specific foods that, we could all probably name 5 or 6 that cause us, or, each of us to be a little bit more gaseous or bloated. Different foods affect people differently. So I don't want to specifically say, don't eat this food or don't eat that food. But if you do eat something and you find that it makes you a little bit more gaseous, I would suggest next time eating a smaller portion, or, if that doesn't help, not eating it at all. Common foods would be like beans and, broccoli. So those types of things. I don't want to say don't eat your broccoli, because I think that's against the dietitian rules. But I want to say, maybe eat a little bit less broccoli, or, see how you feel after you eat it. If you find that you are really gassy and that causes you to have breathing difficulties, maybe eat less or not eat it. Try some other vegetable instead. So in terms of liver complications, I know this is less common than the lung complications, but there are a few things that I wanted to mention here as well. So one of the really common symptoms of liver disease is something called ascites, and this is when there's an accumulation of fluid in the abdomen. And the problem with ascites is because you have all of this fluid and the abdomen becomes quite distended, there may be a decreased appetite because the stomach kind of gets pushed aside a little bit from the fluid. Or you may feel hungry, but then you take a few bites and you feel full. So the trick with the ascites in terms of decreased appetite and early satiety is to, again, eat very energy-dense or energy-packed foods, but also to eat small, frequent meals. You know, instead of having your 3 meals, go for 6 smaller meals, and that will give you sort of the equivalent nutrition. The other thing I wanted to mention that's even more rare is something called hepatic encephalopathy. And so this is what happens when the liver is not functioning well. There's confusion or altered level of consciousness due to an accumulation of chemicals in the brain that usually the liver filters out, but because the liver is so cirrhotic and unable to process things, they don't get filtered out, and so instead they accumulate in the brain. So this encephalopathy can be treated, and usually people are much better after it's been treated. And treatment is medically guided, so your doctor will will work with you on this. And there are some medications that can be used, but there were some things that people did diet-wise previously, but I think we've sort of moved away from that. But I'll mention them anyway, just in case you're curious. So initially we thought a reduced protein diet would help to reduce this type of encephalopathy. And the reason for that is proteins are quite difficult for the body to digest, and you do need the liver to digest them. And the proteins are what are broken down into the chemicals that really cause the confusion. So they thought by decreasing the amount of protein that somebody ate, there would be less of the chemicals in your body in order to build up in your brain. But what we found recently is that it's more important that somebody has adequate protein and have a maximized nutritional state. There's much more benefit to that than there is to having the reduced protein diet. Sometimes a product called lactulose can be used. It's actually considered a prebiotic, which is kind of like a probiotic but a little bit different. And it's been found to be a little bit helpful in reducing hepatic encephalopathy, but that's going to be suggested to you by your doctor as to whether you should take it or not. And then sometimes specific types of amino acids are used, but again, that's going to be prescribed by your doctor. And so the last point I wanted to make is just about 2 of the really common alternative or naturopathic treatments that people ask about. So the first one is coenzyme Q. A recent study did look at coenzyme Q levels in people within a COPD flare. And it was found that people in an active flare had lower measured levels of coenzyme Q in their bodies. And this was thought to be because of inflammation and oxidative stress. So coenzyme Q, I suppose you could consider it being similar to an antioxidant or a type of antioxidant. But the thing with the study is even though a person had low levels of coenzyme Q in an active flare, they had normal levels of coenzyme Q between flares. So what we don't yet know is whether supplementing this coenzyme Q would be helpful. And we don't know if it's helpful to take a supplement all the time. We don't know if it's helpful to take a supplement only during the flare. So at this point, there are no recommendations to take a supplement, but in the next few years, there's going to be more information on this topic, I would bet, because it's really an area of interest. I think this particular study was from like August of this year, so it was really current. And then the last naturopathic treatment that people talk about a lot is milk thistle. So milk thistle is an herbal supplement that's often discussed or suggested by the naturopathic world. And the trick with the milk thistle is that the current research that is out there only looks at liver disease due to alcohol intake or hepatitis C. So it has nothing to do with the alpha-1 population. And a recent Cochrane review of milk thistle found that there was no effect on symptoms. So there's which basically translates into there are a number of studies that found that it's helpful for symptoms and a number of studies that found that it was not helpful. So when they pooled all the data together, they found that there was no effect on overall symptoms by using milk thistle. So a more recent study actually looked at alcoholic liver disease versus hepatitis C and found that there was much more potential benefit in the alcoholic liver disease population than the hepatitis C population. So far, there's not been any research in the alpha-1 population. So with that in mind, I wouldn't necessarily recommend you go out and try it. I don't know that it would really be all that helpful. So that kind of is the end of my part. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Thank you, Beth, very much. We certainly covered a lot. If you need to unmute your phones in order to create questions.
Before we take questions, the other thing I was going to mention is I am going to be able to provide this to Jim to post on the website so that people can go back to it and review things if you missed anything.
Well, thank you, Beth. Appreciate that. So now all my copious notes and my misspellings will be clarified in your PDF notes.
I should have mentioned that at the beginning.
That's okay. Okay, do anyone have any questions? I have one, Beth, for you. In terms of vitamin D, and can you actually overdose on it? And what are the effects?
Yeah, so yes and no. Yes and no, you can overdose. So right now, meaning scientists in the vitamin D world, think that the current recommendations for doses and intake requirements are actually on the really low side. There are some people who think really we should be taking like 10 times the amount. So that being said, vitamin D is considered a fat-soluble vitamin, so it is stored in the fat cells of your body, so you don't pee them out like you do vitamin C. So theoretically, it is possible to overdose on vitamin D, but you have to take massive amounts. You'd have to take a whole bottle in order to get close to the amount to cause any sort of effect.
Okay, because I know people tend to, or hear, that when someone is in an exacerbation, double up on vitamin D, or do you recommend that?
I guess it depends on what you mean by double up. If you're going from 1,000 to 2,000, fine. Units, I'm talking about international units because that's the measure that vitamin D is dosed in. Mm-hmm. That's fine. There's nothing harmful about going from 1,000 to 2,000 units. If you're talking about I'm taking 5,000 now because that's what my doctor told me I need, and I'm taking 10 during a flare, 10,000, I would say not to do that. As for whether vitamin D is actually helpful during a flare, the research on that type of thing is really non-existent at this point. I wouldn't think that there's a whole lot of benefit. I would say that sort of ongoing, more of a consistent dose is probably more beneficial to somebody. But again, there'd be no harm depending on how much you're taking in that flare.
And Beth, just to clarify, I just want to make it clear that what you're talking about are individual vitamin supplements. One thing that we do know is that if you're taking a multivitamin to get your vitamin D, there are other vitamins in that, such as vitamin A, that you can overdose on vitamin A, which can cause more damage to the liver.
Yes.
So it's individual supplements of vitamin D that are most beneficial for patients.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Do we have other questions?
I have one.
Okay.
Is this going to be, are you going to post this?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, good, because I missed part of it, and it was so interesting, and I was so interested I didn't even write anything down.
No problem. I'll definitely put it on the website.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I've got one.
Okay.
I'm just thinking about this whole room temperature, fat, solid versus, good fat versus bad fats.
Yep.
And what about, I'm confused about avocados. People say they're full of fat, don't eat them, and I love guacamole. I think that's the only reason I like Mexican food.
Yeah.
I put guacamole on it.
I don't blame you. I love avocados as well. So avocados, yes, they are full of fat. Yes, they're a plant, which automatically makes them the good fat, the unsaturated. Yes, they are solid at room temperature. But if you were to actually squish them and extract the oil itself would be liquid. So it does follow the liquid at room temperature rule. So avocados, it does depend on how much you eat. A serving of avocado is an eighth of an avocado. So, which would probably be like 1 scoop of guacamole. So I would say, as a general rule, make sure that you don't go crazy with the avocado or guacamole intake. But, it's a very healthy fat, so that's the benefit to it. But I wouldn't recommend that you sit down and eat a massive amount of avocados because that's going to be a lot of fat and a lot of calories in one setting. The other thing with guacamole is what vessel are you using to get the guacamole to your mouth? You're likely using some kind of chip. The chip itself is also going to be quite high in fat. So you kind of got a double hit there. You got your high-fat guacamole, and you got your high-fat chip. So, it becomes a little bit more difficult, and you have to be a little bit more careful in how much you eat when you're using a chip. If you're dipping a carrot into it, fine, because you got a carrot and you don't have a chip. The typical person doesn't dip a carrot in, so I would suggest just being smart about it and not eating a whole lot all at once or too frequently.
So what you're saying is, when we say good fat, it doesn't have the cholesterol in it.
Yep.
That doesn't mean you should eat as much of it as you can.
Exactly. So even though it's considered a good fat, it has the same amount of calories as a bad fat. So if you're trying to lose weight or to maintain a healthy weight, by eating lots of even the healthy fat, you're still going to have difficulty losing weight or maintaining weight because it is fat and extra fat just gets stored in your body.
All I want to do is lower my cholesterol, go crazy on the guac.
No, not really. Because if you go crazy on the guacamole, you're probably going to gain weight, which is probably going to increase your cholesterol. So bottom line is, to lower your cholesterol, you want to lose weight. So, that's the most helpful thing. And eating lots of guacamole is not going to help you lose weight. I would say, have a taste.
Other questions, please? Well, I have another one. My goodness. Beth, in terms of vitamin A, E, and K, that you mentioned for liver-affected alphas, there is minimal absorption.
Mm-hmm.
Can you recommend, I know you recommended a supplement, but what are other foods that are high in A, E, and K?
Yeah, so vitamin A is most common in meat products, especially the livers of other animals. You're going to get lots of vitamin A. Vitamin E, you're going to get from nuts and seeds. You're going to get it from even fatty fish is also going to have vitamin E. Vitamin K, you're going to get that probably best from That's a good question. You're going to get it mostly from like green leafy vegetables like spinach and drawing a blank on examples like Swiss chard and those types of green vegetables. So I would say if you have low levels of those vitamins, eating more of the foods rich in them isn't going to be helpful enough because your liver is just not going to be able to process it. It's best to talk to your doctor about having supplements if you are liver affected. The average person, it's really unusual to have a low vitamin A, vitamin E, or vitamin K.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, I just found a couple more for vitamin E, Beth. There's what you said with the oils, seed, soybeans, wheat germ.
Yeah.
But try not to cook it too much.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
I have a question on butter versus margarine.
Mm-hmm.
The pendulum seems to swing back and forth. A few years ago, people were saying, get rid of your butter, move to margarine.
Mm-hmm.
Now the pendulum seems to be coming back the other way, and they're saying margarine is just as bad, go back to your butter. What are your thoughts on that?
So there's a couple of things that motivate this debate. So on one hand, you've got your butter, which is your saturated fat, which is theoretically the bad fat, which raises cholesterol. So when the heart disease people are having their campaigns or they're really pushing their agendas, butter's kind of the bad guy. On the other hand, margarine, which most of the time is made from plant sources, so doesn't have cholesterol, period, and doesn't have the same effect on your heart disease. But at the same time, a lot of margarines have something that are called trans fats. So this is a whole different type of fat, which we know actually raises your raises your bad cholesterol and lowers your good cholesterol. So trans fats are actually made. The companies that make the margarine actually force, in order to make the margarine solid at room temperature, as a side note, they actually force the chemistry of the fat so that it more closely resembles a saturated fat. And so we know that this chemical procedure actually makes this thing called the trans fat. And that's the bad one that has been, about 2 years ago was a huge thing in the media. Companies had to take the trans fats out of everything. So that's the problem with margarine, is that trans fats may be present. Now, not all margarines have trans fats. You need to buy one that says trans fat free. So the trans fat free margarines are much better for you than any of the other products, including butter. So that's kind of where the debate comes from. Is there was some weird science going on between your regular margarine that made it unhealthy for you.
Is that the hydrogenated oil?
That's the hydrogenated oil, yeah.
So you've got to watch out for that.
Yep. Yeah, the chemical process that they do to make the trans fat is called hydrogenation. So that's why it's called hydrogenated. So hydrogenated and trans fat mean the same thing.
Well, thank you, Beth. Any more questions?
I have one.
Okay.
It's I don't know. I know a lot of people. I guess the question is low carb versus not diets. Because I know lots of people who had, diabetes and all kinds of, high cholesterol and different things, and they went on low carb diets, and I'm not talking very stringent ones, but lower carbs versus not, and their health issues ceased to exist. Like their blood pressure went back to normal, cholesterol levels went back to normal. So I'm always confused about why this is.
Yep, I totally get that. And so the really challenging thing is the idea of carb. Because on one hand, so carbohydrates, it actually is a term that refers to piles of different things. It refers to sugar that you would find in your jelly beans. It refers to your fiber that you find in, the most dense whole wheat loaf of bread possible, or flax bread. That's like eating cardboard. Carbohydrate refers to both ends of the spectrum and everything in between.
Right. Yep.
So the really tricky thing about a low-carb diet, or people saying they went low-carb, what do they mean? Did they go
off the junk food?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's basically it. But it's still scary in my mind. I always think of heart disease when I'm thinking of these programs, because they do let you eat lots of butter and eggs and proteins and stuff like that. On the other hand, for me specifically, when I eat, and I have all kinds of issues with my digestion and my, going to the bathroom and all kinds of things. When I switch over to carbs where I'm eating lots of fiber, lots of fruit, lots of vegetables, my blood sugar goes up. And yet when I switch back, everything fixes, but I have other issues, like being afraid of, even though my tests are all good and my cholesterol is down and everything is good, it worries me because I keep thinking heart disease, heart disease, heart disease. So I'm really on the fence about going either way, and it's very frustrating.
So your blood sugar goes up when you eat higher fiber foods?
Fiber, yeah, like fruits and vegetables.
Yeah.
And because I'm not big on grains, really, like I don't eat a lot of breads and cereals and pasta or any of that kind of thing.
Okay.
But I love my fruits. I love my vegetables. And it seems to put my sugar up, and there's no rhyme or reason for it. So when I stop, and I don't eat things like bananas and stuff like that, I eat quite a few berries.
Yeah.
So I wonder if my body, I'm beginning to think that everybody's body is different, and all these diets that everybody goes on, I think we're because our bodies are different, and some of us, obviously us with the alpha-1, I wonder just how our bodies do react to these certain foods.
So I think part of the reason why you may find with fruits and vegetables that your blood sugar control worsens is that they don't have any staying power. Fruits are good sugars, so I don't want to say don't eat them, but they don't have any sort of sustained release of the carbohydrates.
So I should eat the fruit with something.
So it depends on what you're eating the fruit with.
Okay.
If you're eating the fruit with, say, peanut butter, then you don't have the same effect than if you were to eat the piece of fruit with, like, a whole wheat piece of toast and peanut butter. So the more complex carbohydrates, so the starchier things, the higher fiber grains, they have a much more slow release of the carbohydrate in your body, and so you don't have that same sort of spike in your blood sugar. Whereas fruits, your blood sugar spikes much more quickly. And so if it is helpful to eat the fruits with a protein food, but it doesn't have the same sort of long-acting effect of a sort of a slower release carbohydrate.
So if I was to eat a banana, let's say,
yeah.
would it be wise? Like, could I eat like a toasted banana and peanut butter sandwich type of a thing?
Oh, yeah.
I'm getting a little bit of peanut butter, a little bit of banana, and some whole grains.
Perfect. You got everything there. Okay. And I think with that type of combination, you're going to have much better blood sugar control.
Okay.
It's going to fill you up.
Right. And, of course, if you're having the peanut butter on it, you don't need butter.
Exactly.
Yep. Okay. I'm very confused. I've been battling my own weight for many, many years, and also I don't have a skin condition that they say it doesn't look the same as what people get with alpha, but I do have skin problems that my doctors can't put their finger on. But I notice that I get really affected when I get sick. I break out in little pimply things, and my skin is very affected when I get sick. And I don't know whether that has to do with alpha or not, but the doctors just can't figure it out. And I can tell if I'm getting sick a month before I get sick because of it. Is that a common thing with alpha-1?
As far as I know, it's not. I don't know if anybody else Jim or Mimi, have any idea?
I would suggest that you contact me. We probably have lots more questions for Beth, and certainly some other portions on the nutritional and naturopathic kind of venue. So I would certainly like to open it up to Beth at a later time to bring her back, have some more discussions and other topics. As I indicated at the beginning of our session, I certainly encourage you to provide Jim with any comments on tonight's topic, some other areas maybe that Beth could address at a later time. If you have other questions, perhaps, Beth, maybe if they fall in line, that maybe you could respond to them on our website.
Definitely.
Okay, thank you so much for that. So again, Beth, we certainly thank you. If the board members could stay on the line for 1 minute, I'd appreciate that. But we will say goodnight to everyone else. Thank you so much for participating. We certainly look forward to hearing from you and to having more of these excellent guest speakers and topics. Thank you again, Beth.
Well, thank you for asking me to do this, and thanks for everybody for tuning in.
Okay.
Welcome.